All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us for this Facebook Live. And I'm in a makeshift studio because we're working from home today. Actually, all the offices are closed today. It's a Friday, so it's summer hours. So I have a makeshift studio, but with me, as always, is the Superintendent of Schools for East Central, Superintendent Toscano. Thank you very much for your time. For doing another Facebook Live with us.
Absolutely. Good to see you, Brandon, and welcome, East Central community. Glad to be with you this evening. We've got some updates for you. And of course, during these times, every day that passes and a week that passes, either gives us a little more clarity and in most cases, a little bit more anxiety and confusion. And so this week was no different. And hopefully we can clear some of that up today. We did hear from the commissioner today and plan on hearing from the mayor later this evening. And all of those correspondences give us more clarity and give us more direction about, what our next steps are going to be. And, I do want to make sure that everybody understands, as I've said multiple times, our number one priority is the safety of our children, and to make sure that we're doing our part as a community to get us to the other side of this pandemic. And our second priority is to make sure that we make learning happen. This has been a very difficult situation in terms of public health, but we're on the horizon of an education crisis for our kids, particularly those that have, struggled even before, and that are in special programs, and the list goes on. And so we definitely want to continue with the quality education and in any way that we can possibly get that done, but not at the expense of safety of our children. And then ultimately we've got to make sure our staff are safe. And so with that, Brandon, I know we've got a few questions. It seems like we had a lot of questions that kind of fell into a few categories. So let's get after it.
Definitely. And real quick off the top of the bat, before we get into the questions, I want to remind people we have some pre-formatted ones that we'll go through first. And keep in mind, as you all ask your questions on Facebook Live, the first few minutes is going to go to these questions, these pre-formatted ones. And what happens is if there's so many questions, they actually get bumped out of this queue here. So I want to make sure that, we're able to see everything. And I just want to keep you all in mind. All right. So the first question, Superintendent Toscano, is referring to teachers. What options do teachers have, and when can teachers expect to hear about what teaching will look like this fall?
Yeah. So, first of all, I want to apologize to teachers. I wish that we had clarity before they ever left, June 1. And every week that's went by, our intention was to engage teachers and give them some direction about what they could expect. And of course, there's no excuse, but the guidelines have changed up until today. Regardless, we have had our curriculum team in full force the last couple of weeks. We brought teachers in from every campus, grade level, and subject across the district this week. And they've been working hard to curate what will become our teacher classrooms, our asynchronous platforms. I promised, our teachers that we would do everything in our power to mitigate the additional lift that, this environment of having to teach some face-to-face and some virtual at the same time, or all virtual to start the year, whatever the case may be, that's a new environment for all of us. And so we've had about 120 folks across the district following all safety guidelines, of course, but really working hard on that. And so we are preparing for mid to the end of next week to invite all of our teachers to a meeting like this, and we're going to give them a tour of what we've stood up and what they could expect provided for them as resources, and what they could expect when they return in terms of standing up their classrooms using the resources that we've provided. And so be looking out for that invite coming again mid to late next week. And in that conversation, we'll talk about options for teachers as well. I'm assuming that question has to do with, what if I have kids at home, little kids, and their schools are only offering remote learning, what are my options there? Or what if I have, a pre-existing condition, or am immunocompromised, and I have some concerns for my well-being, or that there's a situation possibly at home where that could be the case? What are my options? And we'll be sure to go through those as well with all of our staff across the district, but certainly with those on the call instructional staff next week.
All right, thank you very much. We got another question. Why are other districts doing a remote learning start and not ECISD?
Well, it's highly probable that that's what we're going to end up doing. The challenge is, and I have a feeling that a lot of the nature of this question came from our board meeting discussion last night. And up until last night, the flexibility for the first 3 weeks was there as kind of a phase in, start slow, kind of build up to, bringing kids back face to face if they chose. But the caveat that was embedded within that by the agency was, in the event that a child was not going to be able to access the full instructional experience from home because of technology constraints or because it just wasn't educationally appropriate for that particular child, we had to offer face-to-face. And so the flexibility for what is being advertised as 100% remote for students wasn't there. And so we were anticipating that today, and actually it was supposed to be yesterday, but it ended up being today, that the commissioner was going to offer some more clarification on that. And what he did offer was he extended the 3 week to 4 weeks. The same caveat exists, but there's a condition that if local officials, health officials, or our county judge or our mayor are in concert with one another, they've been given the authority by the governor and the commissioner to make the decision given the conditions in our particular city and county. And so if there is an order, that we are going to have to start 100% remote, then we would obviously adhere to that. The other reason why we didn't come out with the same message that some of our neighbors came out with is that, we just know that the reality is there's a few kids that we've got to get into our buildings. We've got some special needs students that we've got to do some evaluations on, that we've got to provide some services that are not appropriate to provide virtually, that we've been unable to do so since March. We've got some students that are English language learners that we need to do some assessments with. And then there's the question about our teachers and their small children, and how we handle that with regard to their primary function is to provide instruction for all of the children in this community. And if they have the same constraints of childcare and aren't able to come to school because their child can't be in school, then that's a significant number of students, particularly at the secondary level, that aren't going to be receiving instruction. And so we know that there's some students under some circumstances that we're going to need to work with in order to do our best work under these constraints. And again, our intent is to be focused on safety and reentering in a very thoughtful, careful manner. It is beginning to sound more like it's possible that we'll be directed by mandate that will be 100% remote. The commissioner also said that, should a local community and school board decide that 4 weeks isn't enough, which all the health officials are saying, the conditions are likely not going to change after 4 weeks or 6 weeks or 9 weeks. So we'll be revisiting the same conversation at that point in time. But as it stands right now, the commissioner's guidance is that if you choose to extend a second 4 weeks of all remote, then the board has to pass a resolution and you have to offer face-to-face for kids that want it. So it's very possible that we may end up offering a remote-only start, which at this point might be the most appropriate thing to do given the guidance from local health officials, which we're anticipating could happen as quickly as this evening. But 3 or 4 weeks after the start of school, we're going to be in the same situation with directions from the agency that we're going to have to offer face-to-face for those that want it. So, again, things change daily, they change weekly, and we have to respond to those parameters. I assure you that we're doing everything in our power to make sure that everybody is safe. We've had staff that never left. The majority of us who are here working today were here in March and never left, and we implemented all of our return to work guidelines for hand sanitization and distancing and face mask when we're within 6 feet and all of those things. And when they were mandated, we wore them as well. And, we've had some instances where some employees, tested positive, but we have, to my knowledge, 0 cases where an employee passed it to another employee at work. They were all community spread, and we were able to contain that, work with, implement our protocols for contact tracing, communicate with Metro Health and get guidance, and then execute the appropriate plan immediately. And everybody was safe, and everybody was taken care of medically, and at the appropriate time re-entered, but business went on as usual. And I know that the circumstances aren't the same. When we start bringing kids back and staff back, the numbers are much greater, and the containment is much more challenging, especially if we're still in the community-wide spread situation that we're in now. So, that was a long answer, but I hope that what I conveyed is that safety is our first priority. We're taking it slow to speed up. We're following guidance. We're paying very close attention to the expectations from the agency that aren't as flexible as it may sound at the surface. But at the point at which we have that latitude and it's appropriate to make that decision, then we may make that decision, or we may be mandated to make that decision. But again, keep in mind, after first 4 weeks of school, if the guidance doesn't change, we're going to be right in the situation we were in last week, where anybody that wanted to come face to face has a right to do so, and we're prepared to receive them, and we'll have to do so safely.
All right, just want to remind the viewers again, we have one more pre-formatted question, and then we'll get to your questions. I see the comments already starting. I don't want to lose your comments because, like I said, the older ones disappear from the queue. So just kind of keep that in mind. But we'll get to the next question, which is, so what are the latest guidelines from TEA?
Yeah, I think I inadvertently covered many of those, Brandon, in my last answer. Do you see anything in the chat that is in addition to anything that I previously mentioned? Again, the new guidelines basically said that we, instead of 3 flexible weeks, we have 4 with the same caveat, exception being if there's a local order. Otherwise, there's a second 4-week extension in the event that the board approves a resolution. But the caveat there is you do have to offer face-to-face for that during that second 4-week period. One other thing that was mentioned today as an update is that a high school campus could offer a hybrid only option. And I know that I've talked about that several times because hybrid was always an option, but the caveat associated with hybrid was even if you created a group and B group schedule, for example, any child, regardless of what group, could come to school every day. And so there was no real control of a hybrid option, which is why we hadn't really deployed one. But for high school campuses only, 9th through 12th grade, the commissioner did authorize a hybrid option only for next year should a school district and its school board decide that that's what's appropriate. So we do have that to consider going forward between now and reentry.
So we have definitely some comments here. This one's a good question. Can my daughter do distance learning the whole year?
Mr. Mason, based on all the guidance that we see right now, yes, sir. Your daughter can choose to be a remote learner all year long. And, the only caution that I've had for all families is that remote learning is very challenging for the family due to the constraints for having to proctor the child's progress every day. But it does work. There are many homeschool parents who have been not only proctoring their children's learning, they've been also providing the instruction. In this case, we would be providing the instruction synchronously or asynchronously, very flexible for the household to take advantage of that instruction in real time with other students who might be face-to-face at some point in the year, and then asynchronously, within the 24-hour period that works best for your family. And so if distance learning or remote learning works best for your child and your family situation, you could certainly choose that option and stay in that option at this point indefinitely until the agency changes its guidance. And I wouldn't expect that to happen until we're on the other end of the pandemic.
We have another question. Will the kids going into pre-K be allowed to interact and play together, referring to 6 feet apart rule and social distancing?
Yeah, the guidance for the little ones is the same. They have to follow all of the guidelines. So our protocols would certainly incorporate all of the guidance. They would be allowed to go play, but we would have some disinfection protocols before and after playground use. The kids would be in smaller groups, more controlled and monitored so that they were distanced. Definitely, not ideal for children who learn at that age. So, predominantly through structured play. But those same conditions, the same guidance would have to be implemented and are part of our protocols. Yes, ma'am.
Rebecca Ashton has a question. How will remote learning option be handled with any benchmark STAAR testing, since those are still required?
Yeah, so thank you for that question, Miss Ashton. All the students who are face-to-face, if we're ever in that environment, and remotely, our grade, the standards that they're expected to learn and demonstrate evidence of are all the same. Our grading guidelines are going to be implemented the exact same way for students face-to-face or remote. And as it stands right now, unless the agency changes, when it comes to STAAR testing, they would be required to take the STAAR test like all students and be held to the same standards. I know that the agency did say that there would be some flexibility on the assessment window for students who are assessing remotely. But as it stands today, they would be taking the STAAR test. And as far as any district screeners or benchmarks, students remote would also be completing those assessments. And of course, those assessments for us are information of progress students are making so that we can develop an instructional plan to help continue to accelerate that learning or make some course corrections.
A couple of these I know we've addressed in previous episodes, so definitely check these out from the prior weeks. For example, I know we've addressed this one as far as doing face-to-face in 2 turns. I don't know if you just want to just briefly just touch on that.
Yeah, that's a good question, Yolanda. The challenge logistically to have an AM PM, which is kind of what I'm interpreting the question to kind of ask, is logistically it's almost undoable from a transportation child nutrition standpoint. We may find ourselves exploring even more innovative solutions as the year goes on and as this pandemic persists. But what we landed on in the interest of being able to reliably deliver the services that come with schooling and also ensure that there was some continuity and consistency for our staff and our students at home. We've decided to stand up a regular school day and school year with flexibility within that for face-to-face or remote, unless we're directed otherwise and choose otherwise for the ramp-up period. And so what we know children can do, families can choose to do, is they can fluctuate, toggle between face-to-face and remote as it makes sense for the family and the child. And so that can look any number of ways. So maybe not part of a day in the morning and part of the day in the afternoon in one modality or the other, but certainly from one day to the next or from 1 week to the next as it works for that child and your family's situation.
And I know we've touched on this in a previous episode, but just briefly, Superintendent Toscano, how will remote learning affect the child on IEP?
Yeah, and I kind of alluded that again tonight as to why we were really concerned about being forced to 100% remote only start or at any point in the year, because every child on an IEP has different instructional needs, and many of those where learning can be served remotely, but not all of them. And for those that cannot, that's going to be a big challenge for us in meeting the needs of those particular children. And not only Do we have to do so by law? But we're morally obligated to do that, and we expect to do that. We want to do that, and so that's something that we're going to have to work through on a case-by-case basis, especially if we end up starting the year in a remote-only kind of situation, or if we're forced to go to remote-only at any point in the year. For the children that were not able to fulfill all of the requirements in the IEP remotely, then we're going to have to solve that problem in other ways. And in many cases, we don't have the answers yet. So we also are working with the agency and legal to get that guidance, because again, it's required by law, and that's what we want to do.
Brenda has a question. So when can people expect a final decision on STAAR? A week, 2 weeks prior, day before?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, the mayor has a 6:15 meeting tonight. We've heard rumblings that, we've all heard that he assembled a task force to inform him and the judge and Metro Health about what makes the most sense for the county and city. And so, I would expect as early as this evening and maybe as late as, early next week, we'll get some definitive direction in that regard. But we're looking at what's going on in the city. We're working very closely with Metro Health. Colleen Bridger is the executive director and oversees Metro Health. And, paying attention to what the medical guidance says, paying attention to what we're seeing in our community, and listening to what our parents are saying. And, I think it's important too to mention that, if I'm just thinking about my situation at home, okay, I've got a 14-year-old child, I've got a wife that's immunocompromised. And everything that we're doing in East Central ISD is not putting my family at risk. And nothing that we intend to do going forward is going to put my family or your children at risk. That being said, if we are in a remote-only situation, my child has what he needs. We have the ability to make sure that he has the support at home to proctor his learning. He's going to have the resources that he needs. But the reality of it is, from my view, the vast majority of students across our district, they don't have that same playing field to work with. And so, again, safety is our number one priority. And if we need to make the decision to go remote only for a ramp up period, we're going to do that. But in the long term, it's not best for all the kids in our community. And we're going to have to get to a place where we're going to have to get connected with some kids, and eventually more kids than not.
So talking about one of the challenges, obviously, is connectivity and technology. We've touched on this in previous episodes, but again, if you could just briefly, touch on this. Will the district help or provide laptops, connectivity, technology for students?
Yeah, Bridgette, thank you for that question. We have about half the number of devices that we have students in our district. We have about 10% of hotspots as we have students in our district. So we have roughly 10,000 students. We've got about 5,000 Chromebooks, and that's if we empty our classrooms of Chromebooks, empty our libraries, empty our facilities. We've got 1,000 hotspots. In the spring, that was more than sufficient. But in the spring, we weren't in a situation where we were providing everyday real-time instruction of new material. Truancy laws were not in place, compulsory attendance requirements. And so the demand on those devices, we expect for those devices to be much greater. We are working closely with the agency and vendors that we utilize to procure as many as 2,000 more Chromebooks and another 1,000 hotspots. But as you can imagine, the demand on those and the back orders on those things, we were fortunate to get the additional 1,000 devices that we're in the process of getting. But the agency in this last week has assured us that they've got vendors online. They've got bulk pricing and bulk ordering capability, and that they're able to help us get the additional devices that we need so that there is no children in our community who don't have what they need in terms of devices. And again, that being said, I want to reiterate that devices alone are not going to ensure that children are learning at home, given their circumstances and their age, and the family circle. We have so many parents in our community or households in our community where the family works one or more jobs and they're very seldom home. And for our more mature students, it may be a little more manageable, but for our youngest learners, they're at a tremendous disadvantage. And that just may be the case for a little while. But again, at some point, we're going to have to make sure that not only does every kid have the technology that they need at home, but that they have the support as well.
Steph has a question, and there's a few like these, like, what about freshman camp? When and how would that look? I'm sure back to school nights and things like that. You could probably all roll that one into this question as well.
Freshman camp, meet the teacher, those kinds of events I was just getting a text from Metro Health. I was making sure it wasn't a new announcement. Sorry. We're planning for those things to be remote to the extent possible. And if conditions are improved with COVID-19, by the time those dates land, we will be prepared to offer a combination of remote and face-to-face. But as conditions are today, if freshman camp happened tomorrow, we would probably be conducting that mostly remotely. Again, as conditions begin to improve, we would probably see things like freshman camp, meet the teacher, those sorts of things offered in both options. Again, with the face-to-face options being very controlled for distancing PPE, hand sanitization, et cetera.
Cassandra with a good question. Will lunch pickup stay the same for remote learners? I'm assuming she means with the curbside pickup and things like that.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Cassandra. We will continue to serve both for students who are in school face-to-face, as well as curbside pickup for families that are remote learning. And we haven't solidified the number of curbside pickup points across the district, but we have a number already committed, and we'll definitely get that information out as we get a little bit closer. But we'll have several options that should be accessible to every family who is a remote learner, regardless of where you live in the community.
And this one I see a lot, and I know there's some confusion about it because of TA and stuff, but I prefer my children to do remote learning, but I read first and second cannot do home learning. Is that correct? Not correct,
Mandy. Your children could do home learning. They could do remote learning. The confusing piece is that the agency will not allow us to receive ADA funding for children through second grade synchronously. So in other words, if a child is in third grade through 12th grade and they're logging in real time like we are today, we can count them in attendance. For a pre-K to second grade learner, they can interact with their teacher like we are tonight, but there has to be some additional evidence of progress, which is typically, by definition, going to be an asynchronous bit of evidence, right? Work turned in, et cetera, and then that they can be counted as in attendance. So all of that to say that your child pre-K to second grade can choose remote learning, but they will have to do a combination of asynchronous and synchronous in order to be in attendance, for your child to get credit for being in attendance, but for us to get credit for them being in attendance as well. So it just requires more interaction with us and you and your child, which from that standpoint, it makes sense. Those are our youngest learners. So I think it's logical.
Gabriela says she has 2 students in high school by any chance. So she's talking about, do you know how many students are going to be in each classroom? I think they're going to be applied not just in high school, but district-wide, all levels. And then also, I get this question a lot, so I'm lumping on with the high school part, which is, the transitions in between class. What is that going to look like?
Yeah. So, this is, Gabriela, when we get to the place where we're allowed to bring, kids in face-to-face, whose families are comfortable with that. What we know is that our typical high school classroom Based on the guidance, we would be talking about, in the neighborhood of 17 students and, 14 to 16, depending on the size of the classroom at the elementary level. We have not necessarily seen any evidence up until this point that we would have that number of students in our buildings, given some surveys that we've done in the last few weeks. But that could change if conditions become improved. But that would also maybe mean that the guidelines may be relieved if conditions improve as COVID-19 begins to wane at some point in the future. But we have evaluated all of our classrooms given the guidance, and that's how we're scheduling as well, is to ensure that a healthy balance of everyday face-to-face students and remote-only students is assigned each section, so that the number of students that are there face-to-face is within those parameters. I think a little bit early on in our work, we were finding that we were looking at more like 9 to 11 students in an elementary classroom would most likely be in attendance, and 11 to 13 or so secondary students. But again, that's all, spitballing, if you will, kind of a guess based on feedback that we've gotten from the community, which wasn't 100%. We didn't hear from every parent, so we don't know for certain. But nonetheless, as I've mentioned a few times, however we end up serving our students, we're going to stay within the parameters set forth by health officials in terms of, what's appropriate for distancing and PPE. And, with passing periods, the same things are going to apply. We're going to strategize so that it's less likely that students will be congregating and finding themselves frequently within 6 feet of other students. So there's many things that are built into the plan, like staggered transition times, like students moving in small cohorts and not commingling with other cohorts of students. And so there's many different strategies built into that plan. Again, all of which are to ensure that my child, like yours, are going to be as safe as possible.
Now, just as a follow-up, I've received this question a few times. Regards to the plan, when can parents start seeing that plan? When do you think it will be disseminated out there? I know it's in draft mode.
One more time, I'm sorry. I'm receiving some texts from staff. Just want to make sure everything I've said is accurate.
Sure.
I've got my watchdogs keeping me in line.
Sure. But basically, I know we've mentioned the plan and all sorts of protocols and procedures, and I've myself have been a part of that process and in the drafting of it. When can parents start expecting to see these protocols or procedures, this kind of guideline? When do you think that would be pushed out?
Yeah, I think it's at the point where we're ready to have a broader range of feedback from our constituents. So I would expect in the next week or two we would be shooting that out for feedback, and we'd probably go through different layers of feedback, some face-to-face feedback by a wider range of parents and staff, et cetera, and then probably put it out for some comment to the community as we refine it before reentry. So we're definitely intending on getting broader feedback and making sure that everybody knows what those are. In other words, publishing them. They still are in draft form, and some of the guidance is still kind of changing, and some of the resources that are available to us that we're going to incorporate. We're in the process of testing different kinds of technology, if you will, different kinds of items to, spit guards and those sorts, sneeze guards, sorry, those sorts of things. So those things would all be incorporated if we, decided that we found some that would work for us. So in the next week or two, I would say we'll begin to spread it more broadly for more feedback across the community.
So I'm going to try to lump a couple of these questions together. So the what ifs, all right. So, a student becomes positive, a teacher becomes positive. What happens? What are the protocols? And, is retesting, are we mandating retesting and stuff like that?
So what I can say is once we have a case and we've contact traced and we've put our nurse on assignment to investigate, put all the evidence together, we then contact Metro Health and explain everything regarding the situation, and then we are giving guidance. That guidance we're going to follow. My experience thus far, and if it's inaccurate, I apologize, is that we can't mandate testing. But if the plan for Metro Health guidance suggests that that needs to be part of the plan, then that would be hopefully something that parents and staff would follow in accordance with Metro Health's guidelines. Now, on the back end of whatever quarantine or whatever criteria are given, as it relates to testing or not, I know that they would have to be cleared on the back end medically before reentry, and they would have had to have met the time period symptom-free and such before they could qualify for reentry. So, we'll be very cautious about that. I was a little bit concerned by not being able to require testing. So I need to learn a little bit more about that because I've heard so much about the false negatives and the false positives and such. And so, and we've all heard about, you got to have, CDC recommends, 3 consecutive negative tests within the quarantine period before you're clear. And so, we're going to have to get more clarity from Metro Health and from health officials about what we can and what we cannot require. But at the end of the day, no student will be allowed to return, or no employee will be allowed to return unless they've completed the time and the requirements that Metro Health gives us.
On that note, a classmate gets, COVID. How are the parents notified? How would that process look like, or even a staff member?
So our procedure is going to be, once we're notified, assign a nurse to the case. We're going to investigate immediately, contact trace immediately, interview the student or the employee and anyone else that may have been exposed. I hope that everybody on the call is familiar with the criteria for being exposed. But at that point, we would share what we know with Metro Health. Metro Health will give us guidance. And our goal is that within 24 hours, we would communicate with all staff and faculty that are, so we would have communicated personally with the staff or faculty that may have been exposed. We would have communicated personally with the family and the children of any children that would have been exposed. But then we're going to communicate broadly with the staff in a general sense and articulate, what happened and what we're doing about it and what our next steps are. And we would do the same with parents of students either in that class or in that school, and to the extent appropriate. But our goal is to be completely transparent and be timely and be thorough in everything that we do. And that's worked really well for us since March with our employees, which we've had hundreds across the organization in different departments and in different roles working.
This is an interesting technical question. Is the district going to add UV light to the air conditioning systems to help clean the air in schools?
Yeah, so we have a pretty extensive HVAC preventative maintenance program. We are exploring UV light application in different ways across the district. We are aware that UV light in HVAC systems is an upgrade that could significantly improve air quality. So we are exploring that. I don't know much about the cost, and I don't know much about the lead time on that kind of equipment, given the wide range, the large number of HVAC systems that we have across the district and the varying models, sizes, styles, et cetera. I'm not an HVAC specialist, so I'm probably using the wrong terminology, but our concern is if, number one, it may be cost prohibitive. So we'll need to leverage resources if that's the direction we're going to go. And number two, that we might not be able to get it done quick enough, but we are exploring UV light technology.
Here's another question I've seen a couple times already. We'll combine it a little bit. When are students going to be able to check their schedule? That school supply list is already up there on the website, ECISD.net, but about scheduling and all that stuff. Can you touch on that?
So Maria, first of all, if you're talking about your school schedule as if we were able to return in August, that typically happens, a couple of weeks out from school. During, what we traditionally call prep days at the secondary level, et cetera, students would be receiving their schedules at that time. In terms of elementary, once schedules are done, you'd be notified in a similar time period who your child's teacher is, et cetera. But if you're referring to an emergency schedule that we've referred to the last 2 weeks, that's something that we had conceptualized. This emergency schedule would be something that we might have to deploy if we're given an order by the governor or the commissioner or our mayor or local officials that says you have to shut down and you can only have, say a certain percentage of students in our buildings, which would mean then that we would have to have students in one group or another. We'd have to break the group up. And so that's kind of a hybrid schedule. And our thoughts were that we would be sending those things out, probably by this week, actually. And what we learned is that since guidance had changed to the degree that it had, that we really wouldn't be able to create an emergency schedule until we knew which students were going to be in our buildings face-to-face and which students didn't intend to come face-to-face. So for those reasons, an emergency schedule is probably going to come, around week 2 or 3, because we still feel like we need to have those in place because conditions could fluctuate throughout next year. We've all heard it could be 18 months before we see a worldwide vaccine. So I hope that answered the question.
I think so. So I know we've addressed this in a previous podcast, but how will things play out for extracurriculars, choir, band, sports? How is that going to play out for them? Well,
as far as we're concerned, all children will be able to participate as part of their academic program. When we get to a place where we can have some students here face to face, physical education and athletics and fine arts courses are part of our programs. So they would have those classes and be able to participate during the day. As far as competition goes, those practices typically happen outside the school day. And for any students who are remote only, they would still have access to the degree that they're comfortable participating in those programs, but it would be outside the school day only. So if they're remote, they wouldn't be able to come to school for athletic period and then go back home for remote instruction. Same thing for fine arts, band and dance and et cetera.
So sticking on this line, what if how are the electives going to be graded if a student chooses remote learning? If they're taking band or choir, will those classes be substituted with other courses?
So those are courses that we still believe that we can provide remotely.
Okay. I had a good one about the Learning Academy, but the thing bounced up. Dual language programs, how are they going to look any different? Are you still ongoing? What can you tell us there?
All ongoing. Obviously they may look different in that there could be a combination of face-to-face and remote, in some cases fully remote, but we're preparing to stand up dual language instructional models that are appropriate in quality in either modality.
Monica has a great question, and I think it's one that I've received a few the past 24 hours. If the parents feel that their child is falling behind, will there be extra help? I'm assuming she means via remote learning, and how's that going to, that sort of communication going to work?
Yeah. So similarly, in a pre-COVID environment, if a child was struggling, they could get tutoring. They could come in for tutoring before and after school. They could spend some one-on-one time with their teacher. They could work in small groups with other students and their teacher who are, struggling in similar ways. The same thing exists in a remote platform, through Google Meet. The child could receive one-on-one tutoring remotely. Those times could be scheduled in what would otherwise be typically before school or after school, while instruction is going on. And the teacher breaks students into small groups. They could be part of a small group receiving some support, additional assistance from the teacher. And so you could have a combination of kids, remotely at home and kids present with the teacher, or all children remotely in small groups with the teacher. Google Meet gives us the ability, with some upgrades that we've added, to break our classroom, if it's all remote, into groups of 2, groups of 3, groups of 5. And the teacher could meet with that small group, for kids who are kind of, struggling with the same thing at any point in time, and really provide some extra help. In addition to that, it makes me think about something we've been working real hard on this week, and that is technical support through a help desk. So we know that we've always provided a help desk or technical support through our campus technology coordinators for teachers, and that they're going to need some additional help. So we're going to need to really ratchet that up for teachers, given that we're all going to be providing remote instruction in combination. But in addition to that, we know that for students who are at home, especially as the year begins and they're experiencing full remote learning for the first time, they're going to need to be able to contact somebody who can give them assistance immediately, so that they don't lose instructional time. And so we're working on that infrastructure at every campus. Across the district, we're going to stand up points of contact via email and phones, that there will be folks manning the help desk at every campus. So if your child at Pecan Valley and they're remote only and they're having some issues with technology, call that number immediately or send an email, which will be designed into Google Classroom so that you don't have to go look for it. And somebody's either going to answer the phone or they're going to respond really quickly to your email. And we're going to generate a help ticket and hopefully troubleshoot. And if we can't troubleshoot at the first level, we've got a second level and a third level, all the way to our technology team, if need be, to get you stood up. So both academic supports, we believe we'll be able to deliver in either environment, face-to-face or remote, and technical support as well.
So I found the Learning Academy question. Are there special plans in place to allow the Learning Academy to continue project-based learning, or will it be like a traditional classroom?
So our let me see, special plans in place to allow Learning Academy continue project-based learning, or will it be like a traditional classroom? So our intent at this particular time with the Learning Academy is that the Learning Academy model is exactly the same. So if where there was face-to-face instruction, it could be face-to-face for some, if it's appropriate for us to bring kids in, and remote, either synchronously or asynchronously, if that's the choice that that child makes and their family. So the programming otherwise intends to be the same. The model's been working really well for us, particularly in recent years. Been working really well for our students.
The last one's about, again, the what ifs. If a student tests positive and they were participating in face-to-face, will teachers be able to quarantine for 14 days as well?
That's a great question, Candace, and that depends on the contact tracing and the degree of exposure per health guidelines. And so if the teacher was exposed, then that guidance would likely require some degree of quarantine or isolation. And so what we have seen with some of our employees over the last few months is that when we wore our mask, when we distanced, and provided that we didn't spend more than 15 consecutive minutes within 6 feet of one another without mask, that when there was a positive, although I might have been in contact with that person, but I met all of the requirements for safety, the guidance was, hey, just monitor your health. You're good. You weren't exposed. And so for those reasons, it's going to be really important that we follow our protocols very consistently. And so we have plans as staff begin to re-enter to practice those together. And then we have plans for, as we typically do at the beginning of the year, teaching our kids the routines that we expect from start to finish and transitions throughout the day. We're going to do that in several different ways, and certainly prepare to spend as much time as we need to if and when we ever have students in our buildings to train them as well. So if we're all following those protocols, in the event or when we have a positive, the degree of exposure can really be minimized, and the need for mass quarantine or mass shutdown is really minimized.
I know that we're tight on time today. I know you have a shorter amount of time, Superintendent Toscano, than usual. I know we've been doing an hour and a half, hour 45-minute.
Well, let me show you why. Let me just show you why. I've been babysitting, and I know you've been hearing this noise in the background. And I just wanted you to know that I committed to 30 minutes tonight only because my 2-month-old grandbaby's visiting, and so he's getting a little fussy. He misses Papa. And so we're going to round this thing out shortly, but I just wanted him to say hello and give him back to his mama for a minute.
We'll just do 2 more questions. And actually, you've gone beyond the 30 minutes, sir. You've actually done 50 minutes. So you've gone beyond again. Real quick about immunization. Like I said, just a couple more questions. What about the kids who have to have their updated immunization shot records? How is that going to be handled?
You know, Selena, that's the first time someone's asked that question. So my initial reaction is we're going to handle it the exact same ways we have in the past. But I'm going to get with Ms. Hart, our head nurse, and ask that question to be sure that if there's some additional provisions we need to put in place to make sure that immunization opportunities are accessible, as well as the opportunity to get us those records is something that's doable given the constraints that we have. So thank you so much for that question, Ms. Brock. We'll get with Ms. Hart and make sure that we tighten that up if we need to.
Yes, and I see that I'm going to bring up, just bounced, hold on. Yeah, there was a post on ECISD's Facebook and Twitter yesterday about a CommuniCare event taking place tomorrow. So if you go back out onto the Facebook page, that's one thing that is helpful. Superintendent Toscano, let me bring up this one real quick, and then this will be the last one. Will the school week change as far as Monday through Friday, and what will the time change give teachers more time to plan, teach face-to-face and online?
So our school week, as it currently exists, is Monday through Friday. In our school, it's a very, very typical school day for staff. We'll talk more later this week about exactly what the day in the week, would look like for teachers at this point in time, and in addition to that, what your work's going to look like as you return, before students return to stand up your remote learning classrooms, and hopefully it'll add clarity next week to your question. But also it's going to be a platform for us to receive some additional feedback as well, because we do have, a month's time to continue to make adjustments. I know that the roughly 100 or so teachers that are working this past week, I feel like the sentiment is, I feel a lot better now that I've engaged with what the district has stood up and what our direction is going to be for providing resources for teachers. It seems like a collective sigh of relief that, this is going to be okay. We'll be able to do this. But that being said, they've also had some really good feedback, and so we're making adjustments based on that. And of course, next week's conversation with teachers and staff is probably going to be something like this, where we begin to meet weekly as we ramp up towards August 17th to make sure that we're, opening those two-way line of communication, and that we're, as transparent as we can be, and that we're not missing anything. Giving everybody an opportunity to share concerns and feedback along the way. And so, at the end of the day, we're working real hard to, again, make sure everybody's safe, make sure we can do the very best we can to stand up a quality education platform for all students, no matter their need and no matter the modality. And I want to, encourage staff who are on the call to stay the course and stay positive and have faith that, I wouldn't put my or my family's lives at risk. I'm not going to do that to you, nor would I put any other children at risk as I would my own. So, community and staff, hang in there, be patient, trust that we're going to do the right thing the right way at the right time. And we're collaborating closely with health officials and the agency. We're going to comply to the extent we need to comply, but at the end of the day, we're going to do right by our kids in the East Central community. We're going to hold up our end of the deal. I know that you're in this together, and we're in this together, staff. And we'll talk next week a lot more specifically.
And here's an example, just not even like a couple of months ago, graduation. There was a lot of uncertainty and a lot of doubt and, a lot of criticism about graduation, and it turned out to be a wonderful event. There's so many employees at East Central, Superintendent Toscano. I mean, there's 1,300 of them that care so much about the kids that are putting in 10, 12-hour days, and beyond, working weekends and nights and stuff. That the process is there. We're going to take care of our kids.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for bringing that up. That was an amazing event, and staff did an amazing job, and the community came together, and we pulled it off in a difficult situation. It ended up being an amazing day for our community and our graduates.
Superintendent, one final comment as we wrap this thing up. Oh my God, he's so adorable. Thank you, Mr. Toscano, and go enjoy your grandbaby.
Thank you, Ms. Garza, and thank you, EC community, and we'll see you soon. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.